Mr. Hoare, the floor is yours.
So it's quite normal for a state to have its internal politics and its foreign policies interlocked, and that's very usual. That in many ways a country's geopolitical situation is conditioned by its internal arrangements, its internal relations. But obviously in the case of Bosnia, that's true to an exceptional extent. I don't need to explain to you about the Dayton system and how it works. I mean, you all know. I mean, just to recap kind of briefly, it's a constitutional system that negates the functionality of Bosnia as a state and the democratic sovereignty of its citizens. It gives a veto on reform of the system to anti-Bosnian nationalists who profit from the lack of democracy and state functionality. The constitution is explicitly racist and bars members of ethnic minorities, those who don't belong to the so-called three constituent nations, Jews and Roma, for example, from being members of the presidency or the House of Peoples. This discrimination then is a bar to Bosnia joining the European Union. Meanwhile, the country is under the administration of an internationally appointed high representative who has no democratic legitimacy or accountability and who polices the system. And its current incumbent, Christian Schmidt, has tilted in favor of the Croat nationalists in Bosnia. And this constitutional system was, of course, imposed upon Bosnia by the international community at a very precise moment, a very specific moment in history, above all by the United States, but also to appease its West European allies who wanted the peace settlement to accommodate, up to a point, Serbia's goals. So this was imposed by the international community on Bosnia at a specific point, 1995, when international policy was in a state of flux. It was transitioning from a kind of a model of foreign policy based upon conservative realism, whereby the point was that you have a foreign policy that doesn't really have much to do with ethics. It's about the national interest. Transitioning to a more liberal model that accorded some space to ethical considerations, and Bosnia occurred just at its transition point. You had earlier, in the start of the war in 1992, the kind of much greater accommodation of Serbian aggression by the international community, and then a bit later on, in the Kosovo intervention in 1999, you had the opposite, where the international community actually came in, NATO came in to stop the ethnic cleansing genocide of the Albanians. So Bosnia, Dayton system was imposed at its kind of transitional point. So Bosnia kind of remains stuck in this no man's land. It's not really able to reform to become a genuinely sovereign democratic state, but it also enjoys a degree of protection from being wholly partitioned by its neighbours and by the internal separatists. Now, this situation for Bosnia is dangerous today because we are once again in a situation where the international system is transitioning from one system to another. So we're faced with the potential collapse of a liberal rules-based order and transitions back to a world in which might makes right, in which predatory states are able to attack smaller states with impunity. And of course, again, I don't probably need to explain this because I'm sure you all know as well as I do. International leaders, foreign leaders like Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Benjamin Netanyahu are aggressively assaulting the international rules-based order. And then you have others like Xi Jinping, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Narendra Modi, who are not quite the same, but nevertheless they're sort of eking out their own strongman positions in different parts of the world, exploiting the decay of the international rules-based order. And all across the Western world, the liberal centrist order is being challenged by far-right populist parties. And I should say that things don't look quite as bad as they did a few months ago. Now you have Orban has gone from Hungary, so maybe we should be a bit more optimistic. Maybe Putin isn't winning the war in Ukraine after all. But nevertheless, the danger remains. So the danger is then that the international rules-based order collapses, and with it, the security situation in the Western Balkans. And this obviously poses clear dangers to Bosnia. Serbia's President Aleksandar Vučić and Republika Srpska's strongman Milorad Dodik are patiently waiting for the opportunity to revise the settlement of the 1990s war in favor of Serbian nationalism and its goals in Bosnia, Montenegro, and Kosovo. Croatia's President Zoran Milanovic is openly and aggressively anti-Bosnian and anti-Bosniak, perhaps more so than any previous Croatian president, perhaps even including Tudjman. The Croatia's government under Andrej Plenković is a bit more moderate in balance, but nevertheless, and it sort of remains broadly in step with the rest of the European Union and NATO. But nevertheless, it's entirely possible that in a future case in Croatia, you will have a far-right populist like Milanovic or someone come into power as prime minister as well, with an anti-Bosnian agenda, in which case Bosnia's security would be very uncertain. In this context, Russia is actively seeking to destabilize the region, kind of stirring things up in the Western Balkans. A Russian victory in Ukraine would enormously increase its capacity to do this. And of course, the far-right populists they may take power in Germany, in Britain, in France, in which case the situation in the Western Balkans would only get worse. So you can see, for example, in the case of the system's collapse, Republika Srpska declaring independence, and maybe Croatia would then facilitate that. We just don't know really. But nevertheless, there's also the problem for Bosnia of the status quo not collapsing, to be honest, and this is part of the problem as well. That the Western powers are quite happy with the status quo in Bosnia, so long as the country remains quiet. EU membership is extremely unlikely in this situation. So at the best then, Bosnia would remain in the situation of no man's land and not enjoying real democracy or sovereignty, and not being able to join the European Union. At worst, the anti-Bosnian separatist forces would gradually over time chip away at the statehood and prepare for its eventual partition. Republika Srpska can continue to build up its paramilitary forces until it's strong enough to declare independence, in which case the international community might accept the fait accompli. I should also say, in terms of my own research on Serbia's history, Serbia gained autonomy as a state in 1815 and waited 63 years before becoming fully independent. So, you can have a sort of long-term perspective of how long it takes for an entity to become a fully independent state. So, in these circumstances, what should Bosnia's policy be? And I don't pretend to have any real great words of wisdom, but I'm just thinking what the most important things, to throw some ideas out, that Bosnia's leaders, and by which I mean the leaders of those parties that are committed to Bosnia's territorial integrity, that represent voters who identify with the country, so that's more than half the population, more than half of Bosnia's citizens at least identify with the state of Bosnia, and in some sense feel themselves to be Bosnian, whether they're in office or not, but they need to prepare to play a difficult hand carefully, a difficult geopolitical hand carefully when you're faced with these threats. So flexible policies that would allow them to respond to any international emergency. So I say you need to have structures in place, ad hoc structures, parallel structures that would enable this Bosnian people to form a leadership and mobilize national resistance in the case of an emergency. So you have examples in Bosnian history that conform to this, institutions like the crisis staff or a body like the Patriotic League, which even when they weren't fully in power or fully legitimately legal, they were able to kind of form a nucleus for future defense of the country. Bosnia needs to have its own armed forces that can operate independently of a Dayton constitutional structure and bypass any nationalist veto, and can respond to any attempted secession by elements within the state or foreign aggression from without it. So I think this is a debate that has to be had in this country. I'm sure it's happening already, but nevertheless, the debate is quite an urgent one. One thing is to be certain is that Bosnia cannot rely on the existing order continuing, and it cannot rely on the international community to protect the country, as we saw happened in 1992. So not to be taken by surprise, like Bosnia was taken by surprise in 1992 by the aggression. This has to be a kind of a debate that's quite an important one. So thank you for listening.